Hello, good morning in Chile, good afternoon in France, and welcome to our third day of the Journées Scientifiques Inria, Chile. We have already known about many experience projects and also results of the work of renowned scientists from Chile, France, and more. On Monday, during the inauguration of the event, we were accompanied by the Minister of Science, Flavio Salazar, the Ambassador of France in Chile, Mr. Pascal Teixeira, the Deputy CEO for Science of Inria, Mr. Jean-Frédéric Gerbeau, and the CEO of Inria Chile, Mrs. Nayat Sanchez P. We knew more about the Franco-Chilean network of research that was launched in this event. We have already had two keynotes. The first by Mark Schunauer on artificial intelligence and hybridization. Jacques Saint-Marie, who was our second keynote speaker, presented about mechanistic models and data-driven models to understand the environment. We have already had three scientific sessions in which we talked about climate and how it's studied to understand and use that information. We talked about novel computing paradigms in which new methods of computing were presented. Finally, a third scientific session was dedicated to artificial intelligence and machine learning. In addition, we had a session dedicated to innovation where we presented successful cases in which the collaboration between France and Chilean experts gave positive results to transfer and innovation in Chile. And also, we have a presentation of the French ecosystem of research by Dr. Joaquim Nazar from the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation in France, with whom we had an overview of the French ecosystem and its opportunities for innovation and also for research. Today's programs, what we have for today, well, it's equally exciting, It's full of innovation, science, and also technology. We will begin with the presentation of Pablo Marquet, our keynote speaker of the day, and then we'll hear more about the project Ocean AI, Artificial Intelligence and Modeling for Understanding Oceans and Climate Change. And this will be our first part. Remember, you have to sign up for the second part if you want to join it. You can find the link on the register on our webpage. In the second part, we will have the scientific session Modeling, Nature and Society, and we will hear about projects that use AI and digital science and focus on biology. After that, at 12 in Chile and 6 p.m. in France, we will have the presentation Valuation of Research Software Source Code, Software Heritage, which is a nonprofit multi-stakeholder initiative unveiled in 2016 by Inria and supported by UNESCO. We remind you all to stay connected during the coffee break, and we will have an interactive activity especially for you. Finally, if you want to interact on social media with us, you can tag us on LinkedIn and also on Twitter as Inria Chile. Okay, now we leave you with today's keynote speaker. He's Pablo Marquet. During the presentation, we will be receiving questions through the chat. There are two chats, one general chat and one specific. For questions, please use the question chat if you want to ask something, have any kind of interaction with Pablo. Pablo Marquet originally trained as an ecologist. His career has been marked by transdisciplinary collaboration with physicists, mathematicians, and social scientists to tackle questions in different systems, from ecological to social ones. He has devoted most of his research to the search for the general principles that underlie the structure of dynamic of ecological systems using different theoretical approaches and models such as metapopulation and macroecological models. More recently, he has turned his interest to the integration of different theories in ecology, climate change, and the emergence of social complexity and innovations in simple human groups. Today, in his talk, Digital and Nature-Based Solutions, he will provide an overview of the interaction between biodiversity and climate change and the Sustainable Development Goals. He also will provide an example for the Chilean case and will discuss where artificial intelligence could help to foster mitigation and adaptation in the context of biodiversity solution to climate. We welcome Pablo Marquet to the third day of the Journées Scientifiques Inria, Chile. Pablo, the floor is yours.
Bueno, it's a pleasure to be here in this Journées Scientifiques de Inria. I'm going to talk about digital and nature-based solutions for Chile, which is an attempt to introduce you to some of the biggest challenges we have ahead of us in terms of abating our carbon emissions by 2050. And I want to give you an overview of which these nature-based solutions actually can do for achieving that kind of goal. And also will try to provide you some examples or areas where digital solutions, particularly areas where artificial intelligence and machine learning can actually come in and make a difference. So let's start with a brief introduction regarding what is ahead of us in terms of the predictions or more, well, better said, projections of possible futures for the world. And this is the latest predictions according to different shear pathways of different intensity. 1.9 is the lowest intensity of carbon emissions, and 8.5 is the highest intensity of carbon emission in terms of how warm the planet will become. And you can see that if we achieve the lowest pathway, eventually we will be around 1.5. If not, the world could become 2, 3, or higher in temperature by 2050, and even higher for by the end of the century. So what is at stake is that this scenario generate a series of impacts and the risk of having, for example, extreme weather events, changes in the distribution of species, and a lot of large-scale singular events that might become very likely as the planet get warmer and warmer. So we want to combat this, and one efficient way to do this, or at least the way we have to do this so far is the one that was agreed in Paris by 2015, which is the Paris Agreement, under which all different countries provide a voluntary goal or pathways to achieve emission reductions. And in particularly, since I'm going to be talking about Chile mostly, Chile has declared that it will be carbon neutral by 2050. And one of the things that Chile and also all these so-called NDCs, which are the nationally determined contributions, actually do is to try to support this carbon neutrality or the reductions in emission or the mitigation and adaptation to climate change by using nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions means literally to use ecosystems to actually improve mitigation and adaptation. So it's an implicit recognition that that nature have already invented, so to speak, different type of processes that are important in order to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So nature-based solutions are a complementary kind of solution, and you can see here that in our kind of a need for mitigation, climate-based solution can contribute a fraction of the mitigation needed at a particular time in this sequence. So nature-based solution can contribute, as I said, a large proportion of this, and eventually can basically protect different kind of ecosystem from being lost, and can also help to improve management of human-dominated ecosystem like managed timberlands or manage croplands, or manage grazing lands, and it can suggest ways to improve the sequestration of carbon, and also can, through restoration, increase the fixation of atmospheric CO2 and its eventual sequestration in the soil, both in forest lands and also in wetlands, which are becoming more and more important, especially the ones in near the marine areas, as I will discuss later. Well, nature-based solutions are important because, especially we consider 72% of Earth's surface has been intervened by humans. So we define nature-based solutions as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal changes, such as climate change, food and water security, or natural disaster, and effectively and adaptively, and simultaneously provide human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So the big thing here is that these solutions have to provide co-benefits, especially for biodiversity and human well-being. So any solution that just provide carbon sequestration but do not contribute positively to biodiversity and human well-being, it is not a nature-based solution. For example, planting trees where historically there were not trees is not a nature-based solution because it doesn't help biodiversity. And that process is called afforestation, and we want reforestation. So nature-based solutions has been analyzed at a global scale. One of the reference papers here is the one by Griscom in 2017, and it says that pretty much the amount of carbon that can be sequestered could be 30% of what we need to actually achieve in order to get to carbon neutrality by 2030 or 2050 actually, and involve different kind of ecosystem, forest ecosystems, agriculture and grasslands and wetlands, as I mentioned, and different activities within each of them. And as you can see here, this is the climate mitigation potential in petagrams of CO2 equivalent per year. And you see the reforestation, avoiding the conversion of forests, and natural forest management are big players in terms of reducing emissions, the same as using biochar, which is a way of using pyrolysis to actually obtain a particular type of carbon that can be put back in the soils, for example, and can help to retain humidity and also to increase the fertility in the soil and sequester carbon this way. So nutrient management is also very important in terms of the consequences that adding too much nitrogen to croplands can actually have in terms of generating a positive drive to increase the emission of a greenhouse gas, which is NO2, dioxide, nitrogen dioxide. So also changing the way we do grazing, changing the feeding is important, because grazing, and particularly cattle and cows, provide a lot of ammonia emissions to the atmosphere. So conservation also is important in order to improve agriculture, and wetlands are becoming big in terms of the amount of carbon that can be captured if we better protect and restore peatlands ecosystems. So for the case of Chile, Griscom basically tries to evaluate a couple of nature-based solutions, and it's identified that Chile could eventually mitigate 41 teragrams of CO2 equivalent by year, which is a lot, because if we revise the latest update of the Chilean emissions, we are running short in terms of the balance by 2017 is the emission of 48 teragrams. So 41 is very close to the carbon neutrality goal. But we will revise a little bit of what is this really, or what really this can really make. But when we talk about nature-based solutions, we shouldn't forget, and that's why I put this slide here, that the biggest sector in terms of emissions is electricity or energy. You know, it's the energy sector, the one that has huge emissions, and followed by agriculture with 33, 36, and also energy is almost half of the emissions of the country, and then we have waste production and industrial production and also these terms here with goods, which is basically land use and land use change and forestry. So I will talk a little bit about this line, this black line, which is the net is emissions minus reductions. There's a huge reductions you see here in green, which is all the lands or native forests in national parks and protected areas in Chile, as well as plantations. As you can see here, that the mitigation, the negative emissions, or meaning kind of a sequestering carbon, was much less in 2018. There was a peak here in terms of the net emissions, and that was due to huge fires that we experienced during 2017. So the lesson here is that a huge fire season can actually jeopardize our chances to actually go into carbon neutrality. So anything that we could do in terms of reducing the risk of fire will be welcome. And one of the probably the cheapest way of reducing that, and I will talk a little bit about this later, is to have a good system of fire protection and early warning systems so we can act quickly and impede the propagation of fires. So agriculture, let's examine a couple of these slides just to see, to give you a overview of the chances that are available for using digital technology to reduce emissions. So if you look at this, this is agricultural sector, which includes animal management and crops and all that kind of thing. And you have enteric fermentations in red. You see this is one of the biggest contributors to emissions, followed by agricultural soils. These are emissions derived from agricultural soils, which is CO2 actually leaving soils and other greenhouse gases associated to management of the land. So the thing is, how can we improve the retention of that CO2 and keep it sequestered in the soil? So that's one of the major things that have to be resolved. And nutrient addition is one important component, and it's here in this kind of a pink system, and you have all the nutrients too here. But emission from soil and enteric fermentation are the biggest, and also in green you have the how you manage all the manure from animals. There are several alternatives, and some of them are much better than the others. One is to do biochar with it, but it generates a lot of emissions too. And if we go to the forestry sector, forests, pretty much you see that in general, biomass plantations are important, but so is the native forest that is included here. One word of caution here, that not all the native forests in Chile are included. If for a native forest to be included, you have to have a kind of a process, and you have to be in managed lands. And, and forests that are under national parks are considered managed forest. So also some forests that are under the forestry law that are being managed, but not all native forest is included. So there is potential to increase our fixation of carbon by better managing those forests and giving them either the natural forest or natural park status or other under the law. But you can see that the plantations are big, but plantations, they last for 20, 30 years, and then they are kind of removed from their harvest. And you can keep a decent amount of plantations, but still you see that they are going to be as a long term, they are emitting and they are contributing to decreasing biodiversity, and hence they are not a very kind of important way of solving the problem. And the major emissions, which are above this zero line here, are the loss in the harvest, which include the plantations, which is the highest kind of emission, and then the loss due to wood recollection and use, and then you have fire in this red thing here, which is very significant, as you can see here in 2017, and it can change everything in terms of our budget. Here it is, why there was a big issue. And as you can see here, this is 2017, is above the largest peak we have had in the last 30 years, more or less. And it involved more than around 70,000 or 70 teragrams of carbon emissions and near 400,000 hectares. And most of these fires were because of plantations, because Chilean plantations are probably are mostly done with species that are pyrophytes, which recruit and do well with fire, and they are planted in monoculture, so the probability of actually diffusing or spreading is very large, and they generate a lot of problems. So we have assessed the contribution of all this in terms of contribution to mitigation, and just by looking at the numbers of in the inventory of gases, you can have a potential of more than 32 teragrams if you consider the amount of carbon that can be fixed. And I can give you some example of this. For example, one of big thing in Chile and Argentina is to avoid the conversion of peatlands, especially those located in the extreme south, where there are those kind of wetlands cover like 4.5 million hectares, and they can sequester carbon in the order of 2.2 to 4 million tons, or 2.2 to 4 teragrams of carbon. So it's a substantial amount of carbon that is being kind of sequestered in these wetlands. What is the major threat of these wetlands? The major threat is industrial extraction of the mosses for the Japanese and other markets for confection of many different things, from orchids, kind of a soil, to diapers and other stuff. So it's a huge business, and it's depredating all the wetlands, and they become dry and spoiled forever, and they lose all the carbon. They lose the water, and if you lose the water, they become they are not anoxic anymore, because they are anoxic because they are covered with water. They become not anoxic, and then the bacteria can decompose all the material and all the carbon that has been stored in the soil. here. This form a huge deposit of peat. So that will be respire, and that respiration implies that all this CO2 will be back to the atmosphere. The other important thing is to better manage and improve existing protected areas. The protected areas in Chile cover approximately 21% of the surface of the continental surface. I'm just talking about the terrestrial ones, and even though it looks like we have a lot, it's not that much because it's located mostly in mountainous and in the southern area. But all the areas where the conflicts are and where we need more parks and protected area, there are very little, and the management and the budget is just very small. Our calculations give that they pay between 0 and 3,000 pesos, which is less than $5 per hectare. And so it's impossible to manage with that amount of money. And the amount of people working on this, I mean, the national park guards, they have to cover or protect or be stewards of areas of the size of Singapore per person. So it's completely inefficient. So you have to be better funded in order to protect all the carbon that is stored there and protect all the biodiversity that keeps actually fixing carbon. So there are many proposals for natural areas. The way you make a proposal for a protected area network is that you create a network which is a covering problem. It's an operational research, is an optimization problem where given the distribution in space of features that you like it could be water distribution, species distribution, particular areas where you think are important for biodiversity and that you want to protect. Given the distribution in space, you do optimization to actually design or came across with the best distribution of areas that actually cover this feature, and at the same time are the minimum in terms of total area covered. And you can also include some other constraints. For example, you can include a budget, and you may want to minimize the budget. All this exercise is called conservation planning or a strategic conservation planning, which is a very well developed subdiscipline within conservation biology that use a lot of applied mathematicians working on it. So that was one area where computational and machine learning algorithm could also eventually be used to actually support, improve, or complement some other more traditional methods. So one of the things that have covered or have came into the scene of nature-based solutions that are recognized as very important is the importance to protect and restore a kelp forest. So kelp is usually the name people give to this brown algae that form this erected forest. And that, as you can see here, have a lot of biodiversity because are areas where most fishes recruit. They have a lot of species, and it can be altered seriously through deforestation because this forest, this algae, are harvested to do a lot of chemicals like agar, which is used in the alimentary industry, in the cosmetic industry, and so on and so forth. And these species are very important because they grow very fast and they generate huge accumulations, and they are very common along the Chilean Pacific and in all the Pacific pretty much, and kind of Mediterranean areas and temperate, not too much in the tropics, but they are very important, especially down south in the fjord region. And one of the challenges here is to be able to identify and quantify this forest using remote methods, because it's very difficult. And we have estimated that it can help sequester. I mean, the most conservative estimate is zero point 0.5 teragrams of carbon. But they have been assessed and in other parts of the world, and they can have a much higher potential, and going up to 1.5 petagrams of carbon globally. So in Chile, we have several species of kelp, and the classic ones are the macrocystis and the Durvillea antarctica. And as I mentioned, these are heavily harvest. There are concessions for harvesting, but there is not too much control in the method of harvesting, and the methods are very destructive because they take the whole plant. This plant is attached through this area to the substrate, usually rocks, and they take the whole thing out instead of just cutting the tally or the fronds, as we call it. Instead of just cutting it and let the frond to regenerate the plant, they take out the whole thing and then nothing regenerates. So it's food for now, but hunger in the future. So there is a lot that can be done in terms of improving this and its delivery. So one of the other nature-based solutions are strictly focused on cities, and they deal with ways to improve, for example, water retention, having gardens on roofs or green roofs or green walls, where you can have a species that fix carbon and also provide you with insulation, and they also improve water recollection for the city systems. And one of these activities also important is the reforestation of island hills, where usually many cities have this, in Chile at least, these hills that are located in the middle of the city, island hills, and they can be restored. Usually they are being heavily impacted by human activity. So the idea is to restore these areas with forests or with native forests, not exotic species, so you can improve carbon sequestration. And one of my favorites is this one, is fish carbon. It's all the carbon that is accumulated in fish, and fish usually they can produce a lot of carbon, and particularly whales are important in something that is called the whale pump. The whales move from the feeding grounds or to the breeding grounds, and usually in the feeding grounds, like in temperate southern Chile, they come and they eat they eat usually in the deep areas, calamari and all this stuff, and they usually defecate in the shallower areas, and the feces of whales, which are massive, also contain a lot of nutrients that actually improve the fixation of CO2 by phytoplankton. So we call this the whale pump. And once a whale dies, there is a huge amount of carbon in this carcass that can be harvested and also can be restored to the soil or to the sediments and be sequestered there. So the whales, improving the whale population can have a huge impact in terms of potentiating mitigation action, potentiating the sequestration of carbon. In Chile, during the whaling industry times that ended back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, my calculations were like nearby 50 or 40,000 whales were killed. So that's a huge amount of carbon. And now it's becoming very fashionable to actually, there are much more data to do this calculation, and all the results point out that whales are very important to improve the way we can sequester carbon, not because what they do, but also because they will provide a much better way of also potentiating other mechanisms. And the other mechanisms I want to talk about is the biological carbon pump, which is the one that is driven by phytoplankton. Once phytoplankton is, which is coupled with the whale action, once phytoplankton actually start capturing CO2 from the atmosphere, eventually phytoplankton dies and is eaten by microbes or other species, and but it starts sinking. I mean, the carcass starts sinking, creates an aggregate that starts sinking down the ocean floor, and eventually they carry all this carbon down to the seafloor where it is sequestered. So that's called the biological pump. There is a pump that is sucking up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere due to the phytoplankton that takes that fraction of that and send it back to the bottom of the ocean. So the whale actually improved these phytoplanktonic blooms and create a better way of capturing that. But we need to do much more research on how this carbon pump functions, also the whale pump. How it is distributed, and where are areas in the world where this carbon pump could be potentially important, so we better protect those areas. With Inria Chile, we have been working with the data collected by an expedition called Terra Oceans, which is cruising the world, taking information on the ocean, and especially in terms of all the biodiversity in the ocean, from microbes to phytoplankton, and all the not only that, but measurements about abiotic environment and also the efficiency of the biological carbon pump. So there's a very important database that can be analyzed, and using all sorts of digital methods, so we can improve and actually can associate or understand much better which are the species, which are the places that harvest or that are more important for the sequestration of carbon. And there are many ways of doing that. You can use, for example, maximum entropy methods to ascertain the distribution of particular carbon areas or carbon important areas, given some constraints associated with the abiotic or biotic variables. So there's a great potential to apply artificial intelligence and other methods to improve carbon sequestration. There are, to my surprise, there are some journals already in agriculture that are pretty much more emphasizing processes and logistics surrounding agriculture more than how we improve the soil condition in order to make it more important for carbon sequestration. But there is a lot to be done there. Some applications has been very important in terms of collecting huge amount of information on abiotic variables, precipitation, temperature, biodiversity distribution, and do all this kind of machine learning thing to generate a simple representation, reducing the dimensionality of the problem, so you can have a good description of different areas within the ocean that behave similarly, which we call these eco-provinces, or those areas which are kind of very similar to each other, so clusters, because they have a cluster of characteristics. So this is very important to actually feed up other analysis where you can identify using machine learning also areas within these provinces that might have particularly important for acidification. So that is very, very important, because acidification is one of the biggest impacts of of climate warming. So this analysis in particular is done in the Arctic Ocean, and one of the things that happen with the Arctic Ocean melts is that increase the likelihood of observing a pH decrease or pH increase in the ocean. So pH decrease, become more acidic as the Arctic melts. So you can actually identify areas where you have to act now, or areas that will be suffering in the near future. So machine learning also has been used a lot in terms of the industry, or where CO2 is generated in general, in ways of improving sequestration by geoengineering or chemical processes, finding out new ways of new materials that can actually absorb CO2, and generate predictions of how you can actually improve separating all this CO2. Not directly linked to nature-based solution, but it could eventually be linked to nature-based solution by improving, for example, by analyzing something that, as far as I know, nobody has done, which are the types of soil that will, or the soil potential for capturing CO2. There are some ways of analyzing also different databases of different abiotic variables, and also different kind of predictions in the future, and identify areas that could be potentially at risk. But most applications have deal also with improving the management of data centers and managing energy consumptions, or managing traffics in order to make the traffic more efficient in terms of reducing emissions, or a way of actually designing buildings and building materials that will be more friendly in terms of emissions. So there's a lot of potential of applying digital methods to help abate the climate crisis. So this is pretty much an invitation to align artificial intelligence and all the muscle that the digital and the computer family has in order to improve and face the climate crisis. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Pablo, for your presentation, for that keynote. Thank you all people connected right now, for the patience also. Now it went perfectly, and the presentation was very, very clear. So now it's time to invite Pablo to the stage, and also open the question session to the participants with us here today. So please, Pablo, if you can connect, we welcome you to stage. And also, we will check all the questions in the question chat. So let me see. Okay, we're ready. We have 2 questions at the moment. So Pablo, I think he's connecting right now. So let me check. Yeah, he's coming. Pablo, how are you?
I'm pretty good. Good to be here. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Very good. And we have 2 questions right now. So I will start with the first one. I think that you can also read it with me, right? So I will read it out loud for the people. So Luis is asking, how will you sort all these research problems by A, potential impact on climate change, and B, how tractable do you think that problem is?
Right. Well, that's a good question. There are many factors or processes within society that contribute to carbon emissions, and there are many actions we can do in order to abate them or to reduce them. But probably one of the most important things to have in mind is that is the following. I mean, we always think of constructing or engineer a system that can actually um, uh, capture more carbon. We always think of trying to devise a technology that can capture carbon from the atmosphere and put it in the soils and do that. And there is a lot of geoengineering and solutions like that. But the thing to realize is that uh, nature, I mean, life, already invented that, and that invention is in biodiversity. Biodiversity can do that. It solves the problem already. Plants can suck up CO2 and put it in the soil. So we have to take advantage of that and try to engineer our systems in order to make sure that we can take advantage of biodiversity to increase our sequestration of carbon. And in particularly, that is very important for agriculture. That's one of the sectors where we can actually increase our carbon sequestration, and it's huge. I mean, agriculture has a huge water footprint too. So if we can reduce the amount of water it uses, if we can increase the amount of carbon it sequesters, by changing the way we do fertilization of soil, the way we manage them, we could eventually sequester a lot of carbon and maybe achieve one of the Paris Agreement goals of limiting warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. So that would be my. The second part of the question was that how tractable you think that the problem is. The problem is completely tractable. There's no problem with that. The only thing it requires something that can be difficult to achieve, which is we have to somehow have a transformation. But it's not only a transformation in the way we do things, but it's a transformation in the way we think about nature. We have to be transformed in order to live in a different world where we could do things better. We should change the way we live, the way we actually do business, the way we communicate, the way we inhabit cities, the way we do agriculture, ranching, and the way we actually exploit the oceans, and the way we actually reconnect with nature. I mean, usually we when we talk, we say people and nature, or humans and nature. We are part of it, and that I think that very simple fact underlies a philosophical stance or point of view that is very detrimental to actually solve many of the problems we face. So, thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. Let's continue. Okay, Andrew. He said, "Thank you, Pablo. This is a very interesting presentation. I wanted to ask how you disseminate scientific evidence that engage both policymakers and the public in order to generate awareness of our impact in the environment." That is a very big question.
Yeah, well, that is tough, but but I think we have to, as scientists, we have to engage with society. Science is a social activity, and it's a collective activity too. I mean, just what we are doing here is a collective thing, and we are kind of teaching and learning from each other. So I think we should do more of this and include more audiences, diverse audiences, going to schools and do talks to people. I try to do that a lot. For example, I've engaged in a project that actually is led by someone in France, which is the Global Youth Pact for Climate, which is working with several hundred schools around the world, and these people is little school. They have projects on climate change looking at their neighbor areas, and working with the professors, and there are scientists also that support some of the groups, and that's important because probably we may not be able to change much, but we can actually have an impact on younger generations, and that's particularly important. Not to actually paint a very dark future for them, but we have to be optimistic that we can solve the problem. And by solving, and part of solving the problem is to try to change people and prepare them to take the right decisions in 20 or 30 years ahead. So I think we have to engage. We can engage. We can do. I'm also part of the climate change scientific committee at the Ministry of Science in Chile, and we have a lot of documentation freely available on biodiversity, climate change, cities, the sea, everything. So we do a lot of also policy making report and things. So it's something that we can do better though, and we have to engage as scientists into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. I think like the main challenge here is to caught the attention of the public, because the decision makers, they have the evidence. We have the evidence
exactly
on the table, and we have a new minister also, and she's Maisa Rojas. She's very like on top of this situation. She's a very good and scientific, climate scientific
right.
scientist, right?
But then is a problem. Let me comment a little bit on what you say. The problem is that to solve climate change is not a sectorial thing. It's cross-cutting. So you have to have all the ministries working together. As someone said, sometimes the world have problems and universities departments. It's like the problems are beyond disciplines and are beyond ministries, and we have to work together. And that's a difficult part because it's not just only science, but it's also all the social and economic aspects that create this big, difficult thing to master. But
yeah. Pablo, Hugo sent two questions. So the first one is, these problems typically have few data. Since the scale is huge, maybe it is possible to describe and understand the phenomena by simulation ML. It can be validated by experts. What do you think about it? Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, definitely, and it's been done, and actually, I mean, there are many models for the climate. Since the climate is such a non-linear, difficult to predict system as any turbulent fluid, and there are at least 32 to 40 global models for the weather, and I'm projecting the climate into the future, and there is a lot that can be done in terms of using machine learning in order to improve them. And yesterday we saw some of these methods applied to treat wastewater, and working with all this kind of integrating the biological, the abiotic components in order to increase the nitrogen fixation within the system. And we can do the same for coupling climate model with biodiversity and with the economy, and predict futures, predict how likely is that we will experience some particular future in terms of emissions and also in terms of economics and social behavior. And actually, there is a lot of this. These are called the integrated assessment model, where you couple the economic of a system with the ecological part and the climate, and you generate this very complex model, and so you can actually make scenarios for the future. Actually, these models are the one that the International Panel on Climate Change, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change uses. They have they call it the pathways into the future, and they make assumptions regarding how biodiversity will respond, how the economy will respond, and how the weather will respond. So those models are essential. We are with people at the University of Chile at CMM trying to or thinking on actually putting together a big group of people to actually start doing this kind of model for Chile, because that's the kind of tools you need in order to planify your country, to see, shall we do more forestry? Shall we? What happens if we have another very strong or huge fire season again? What will happen with the agriculture, and so on and so forth? So we need these tools to actually manage and anticipate the future.
That is very
Yes, thank you
important
for the
also
question.
for adaptation. And linked to this,
Yep.
Pablo, also you were talking about pathways, scenarios, modulation, and Hugo is asking, how can we trust in simulation of the future? Do simulations play an important role in making decisions and proposing new measures?
Yep, indeed. I mean, the simulation for the future are possible worlds that we can
Hmm.
experience. It's the
Hmm.
best scenarios we can predict, and it's actually it's, the scenario building is becoming a subdiscipline in this area. How to build scenarios, the importance of having the scenarios for the future, and actually guiding our development based on those scenarios. So even though we cannot for sure predict the climate precisely, most of the tendencies are well captured by these models. They usually fail at some particular areas, like suppose in South America, all the Andes is difficult to actually to model because it's not too huge in terms of the resolution of the models, and also it's very convoluted and heterogeneous. But we can do better, and improve the models to better capture the dynamic of a particular region. But even though we can have uncertainty, it's great to have these scenarios for kind of a picturing what might be happening in the future.
Great, Luis. This is a very interesting question. Very interesting talk. Luis said, "I wonder how secure do you think that it will result direct intervention in marine eco provinces in order to modulate the biological carbon pump instead of only protecting areas?"
Right. I mean, if you protect an area, you will somehow help restore, the 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 dynamics of the biological carbon pump. Especially if you, for example, if you limit the amount of underground, what they call this fishing with drags that drags the seabed, you know. All those dragging of the seabed are terrible for the carbon pump, because most of the carbon is being kind of a deposit down in the seabed. So you are kind of recirculating this carbon. Also, if you limit the amount of fish that you capture, and if you actually limit the intrusion of ships, you will actually do not disturb whale, and so you can improve the whale pump too, which is connected to the carbon pump. So by protecting areas, you are also somehow protecting the functioning of the ecosystem. So that's the major goal. That if you protect them, they will start being less disturbed by human action, and eventually they will recover and improve their function. So especially in Antarctic and subantarctic areas, it's very important to protect the ocean.
Excellent. And Catherine also is asking, what are the areas in which you believe it will be easiest to implement changes that will generate the greatest impact with the least effort cost? Maybe you can mention a couple.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think a lot of people is is asking the same questions, and there is no silver bullet. In the case of Chile, I think that there are a couple of things that we should do very quickly. One of them is to implement a strong of a strong kind of agency that can take care and anticipate and generate models to anticipate areas or to predict which are the areas that might suffer fire in Chile. As I mentioned in my presentation, a huge fire can have a devastating impact and long-lasting impact on biodiversity and on the carbon emissions of the country. So it's very important to do better with fire prediction and have remote sensing, have early warning systems in place. And the forestry agency who actually is doing this in Chile, I would say, is doing too many things, and it should be reformed. Actually, there is a law that has been still waiting in the Congress to create the Forestry Service that will have a more focused kind of a mandate, and fire will be one of the priorities. So that's very important to do. The other is to protect the carbon that is already sequestered in the soils and in different ecosystems. And to do that, well, fire prevention is important, but also improve conservation. There are many areas in the coastal Cordillera, for example, in the coastal Andes, that need to be better protected. All the area of El Maule, 7th region, 8th region, there are many very diverse and singular forests that need to be protected better. And we also need to implement a better management of the protected areas. We have to improve their funding. I mean, they don't have money to actually manage huge areas, and you have to have systems that allow you to impede the coming of cows and sheep into those areas, because they eat all the plants, and take people, keep people away from them. So much better management. I would say those two, and the third for me is always all the agricultural areas that need to be changed to a better management, and then reforestation, which is also a very big thing, and restoration of natural areas. So with that portfolio will do a lot of climate mitigation and will foster a lot of adaptation into the future, and also will actually secure and create food security, especially if you have the people doing the agriculture more connected with the local market, and so people get engaged and knows better agriculture and start demanding more organic agricultural practices, recycling, and do all those kind of things. It's very important instead of just being producing for selling in the international market, which is a complete different mental frame than selling to your local neighbors and to your local market. And you can be much more biodiversity friendly by doing that. So,
and also having some diet changes, right? I was reading a paper that very good in Nature. They said 20% less meat, for example, this consumption can gave a direct impact on deforestation, for example.
Right. Yeah. No. But before stop eating meat, we might try to change the way we do all the ranching. There are regenerative ranching techniques where you can improve soil capture, all the carbon capture in the soil, and reduce the methane emissions by cattle. So there are many ways. I mean, it's just we have to adopt them.
We have to adopt them all. That is the thing. Pablo, thank you for this interesting presentation, and also thank you for the interaction with the audience right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A pleasure. Bye-bye.
Have a nice one. Okay, well, thank you, every one of you, for all the questions that you sent to Pablo. Currently, it's very important since climate change, and this is one of the most important challenges we face as a society. So, to know how to monitor changes and collect the data that nature gives us is extremely relevant for science today, and to provide the community with this information to stop the environmental damage. I would like, and this is very important for us, please remember this. I would like to remind you that the participants that read Pablo Marquez's interview, as well as the interviews of the rest of the keynote speakers as of previous days, Jacques Saint-Marie and Mark Schunauer. These are three amazing interviews they three gave to the Journées Scientifiques Inria, Chile. You can find them on the Gazette on our website, Journées Scientifiques 2022.inria.cl. The three interviews on the Gazette. Also, the videos of these talks will be available on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and also on our website. Now, it's time for a coffee break. We invite you to meet at Gather Town. The link to join this interactive session is being shared in the chat. It is an interactive space of networking. Please join us there so we can exchange and also meet some of the interns who were enrolled in the mobility program coordinated by Inria Chile. These are Chilean interns from Chilean universities that had taken part in the research internship at Inria centers in France. And also, it's good to know that we will have a little change in the program. In our second part, we will have our scientific session, followed by the presentation of software heritage as planned. And finally, we will close our third day with the presentation of ocean AI. Finally, remember, those who wish to participate by commenting on social networks can tag us on LinkedIn and also on Twitter as Inria Chile. We will be back for the scientific session in 15 minutes. See you there.